Hey again. I am thinking that if I'm consistent, maybe I can do videos once or twice a week. I think this will be twice a week now. Um, on topics that just come to mind that I feel like God's placed on my heart. And today or tonight, a verse that stood out to me that I was reading was in James again. And it's James 4, verse 8. And it says, "Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded." And then the second verse in connection to that was James 1, verse 8. And it says, "He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways." So in this verse, the eighth verse before that, in this letter, James is talking about asking God things, asking for God, asking God for things, for wisdom and faith without doubting, and how that doubt leads to like wavering, and it leads to being unstable. And then the other verse stood out to me because it's talking about like purifying your hearts if you are double-minded. And so I guess I want to talk about the connection that I've seen between the double-mindedness and perfectionism, which is something that I've struggled with my whole life without really realizing it until recently, and recently being like the last few years, because anytime someone talks about perfectionists, I never thought of myself as one, because I'm like, oh, if I was, certain things would be a certain way. Like, and like I said, this is from, I guess, being a teenager up until now, as an adult. And to me, a perfectionist is someone maybe who's like house is perfect and clean and in order, someone who's like super active in the community, always there for their friends and family when they need, take care of themselves 100% like all the time, probably speaks without stumbling or rarely, or just a great communicator. Like, I have an idea, I guess, in my head of what that means. But I was reading, again, this book I mentioned in another video before, Brene Brown's book about Atlas of the Heart, and I really enjoy this book. I haven't read through it, but it just gives clear definitions to emotions and feelings. And the one that, like, shocked me, or just really was eye-opening, was the one on perfectionism. And I'm just going to read part of this from her book. It says that shame is the birthplace of perfectionism. Perfectionism is not striving to be our best or working towards excellence. Healthy striving is internally driven. Perfectionism is externally driven by a simple but potentially all-consuming question: what will people think? And number one, I like the fact that she distinguished between what is working to be your best and striving towards excellence versus perfectionism, because sometimes it can seem like those two things are the same. Like, maybe to me before, it's kind of like, okay, I had a hard time discerning between that. Like, well, what if you just want to improve and just better yourself? What's the difference between that and this perfectionism that comes from shame? And she points out that it's internally driven, but perfectionism is externally driven. And I mean, I don't want to read this whole thing. I don't know if I'm allowed to read this whole thing. But on the next page, a few, let me see. Let's see, we never fall short. Okay, so it says people with high levels of perfectionistic traits there's like 4 bullet points, are doomed to fail at meeting their own expectations and the expectations that they assume are held by others. And I want to stop right there, because lately I've been becoming more aware of expectations I have of myself that are perfect, and ones that I feel like people hold me to but they don't. even having, if I'm being honest, like a conversation with my husband and realizing like some of the expectations I think he has of me, he does not at all. And they all come from me. Like just talking it out and having that type of conversation. And it's just like, this is dead on. Like you assume that these expectations are held by other people and they're not. The second one is perceive themselves as consistently falling short of other people's expectations. Behave in ways that result in perceived and actual exclusion and rejection by others. And then lastly, feel socially disconnected and have fewer social connections. So, and just to kind of end this on a brighter note, Brene says the next line, I write a lot about perfectionism, and she says I often call myself a recovering perfectionist and an inspiring good enoughist, which I would say I'm aspiring to be as well. So I think with the perfectionism, that leads to a double-mindedness, and I really like looking up the Greek origin of words in the Bible because it gives like I think a more clear sometimes understanding or just exact. And that word means like two-souled almost, and that's just again like just kind of dead on with that feeling because it's like you have your own feelings and thoughts which sometimes you push aside in favor of the expectations that other people have or thoughts that other people have, or you think that they have of you. And so it causes this doubt and double-mindedness. And it's like, it causes, I know for me, like an indecisiveness. And because it's like constantly thinking like, what would people think if I do this? What would people think if I do that? And it's stifling and it doesn't feel good. And I'm just glad because I feel like God is freeing me from that, and that's something that I'm starting to shed. And I would say, like, honestly, in the past, like, few months, like, recently, which I'm so grateful for. But that stood out to me because, like, the verse said about being unstable in all your ways. So, like, instead of walking with, like, a confidence and in faith, you are constantly going back and forth within yourself. And I know that some of this is just human nature, but it can get to a point or be something that kind of, like I said, causes you to be stagnant. I know, makes you or has made me sometimes risk averse or not wanting to try new things. But I think even like I said before, like with doing this channel and a few other things in my life, I'm like, I want to step out of that and just try to do things and see what happens, and not being worried about so much about what people think of me and just doing the things that I've wanted to do, and see what happens. So I wanted to make this video for anyone who's struggled with that as well, or dealt with that, and seeing that even in the verse, let me go back to it, that says having faith in God when you ask, and just if the root of like that double-mindedness, that going back and forth, that self-doubt, is shame or worrying what other people are thinking about you, or I guess both of those things, then what you need and what I need is faith in who God says we are and connection with someone who you can trust and open up to and talk to about the things that's on your heart, and in that you'll find freedom. And one thing that I've been saying to myself over and over again when my mind goes to those places of like what people would think of me is that people don't validate me, God validates me. So that's something that I'm saying over and over again when I think about it. Obviously, there's times where I've gone days without saying that or thinking about it, but once I see my mind continuously going that direction, and obviously that has effect on how I feel, I remember to say that, and obviously to look, in the Word of God for truth And the verses I feel like are common, like, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And saying those things again and again to renew my mind. And that helps me to. Sorry, my baby woke up, I think. That helps me. So to wrap it up, I think it's important to speak truth in your mind and have faith in who God says you are. And I think that gives you freedom to express what you want and feel and not feel like that's unimportant or, because you're important. I have to cut this short and I feel very abrupt, but I gotta go. So I hope that helps somebody.